Keeping the world company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about understanding the escalation in Ukraine. What are the dynamics and where is it going? Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our esteemed guests for the show are Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, and Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor of political philosophy, UH Manoa. Welcome to the show, all of you. So let me say that we have an escalation on our hands, and we have to look deep and find out why it's happening, what the various steps of escalation are, and where it is all going. Because sometimes, I don't want to surprise you, sometimes things are not exactly as they seem to be. And this escalation really is not exactly as it seems to be. So let's start with you, Gene. What are the steps in the escalation over the past week or two?
First of all, President Biden has released Ukraine from a former prohibition. He's allowed Ukraine to have missiles that can actually attack Russia further into Russian territory. Secondly, the United States will be also releasing more mines to Ukraine so they can mine the border along the Russian line in Donetsk and Luhansk. And the Russians are very dug in there. And they don't want them to move forward anymore because Russia currently holds 20% of Ukrainian territory. And also the Ukrainians hold Kursk in Russia, a region of Russia. So they want to, I think, make the lines at the moment, not move the lines, not allow the Russians to come forward. Ukraine is using drones on the battlefield. This is 21st century battlefield where drones are more effective in terms of eliminating troops that are dug in than are the traditional artillery motors and so forth. And of course, this is not really an air war per se. So it's not like you can get troops in combat on the ground and support them with air attacks on the enemy. So first of all, they want to be in place. Secondly, Ukraine wants to hold the line. Ukraine's manpower is getting extremely tired and overworked. Ukraine has not succeeded in drafting younger men, and it has reasons, political reasons, for not wanting to push that. Trump's recently appointed General Kellogg for Ukraine and Russia is on the record for wanting Ukraine and Russia to negotiate an end to the war. And I think Trump wants that too. But of course, how things go on the negotiating table depends on where the troops are and who has the advantage. It may seem that Russia has an advantage because it's borrowing manpower from North Korea. And Biden's releasing Ukraine prohibitions on how far into Russia they can attack with missiles has connections to the fact that Russia has imported 100,000 troops from North Korea. But this also tells us that Russia doesn't have the troops of its own to maintain the status quo. It has to depend on other parties. They've really emptied out their prisons already. Putin must not be secure enough to be able to draft Russians. He's also he is already drafted from the outer regions. So Russia can't really sustain this. Ukraine can't really sustain this, but neither one wants to give up while they don't have an advantage. And we'll just have to see what happens.
Tim, can you talk to us about the ballistic missile step in this escalation?
clearly a good defense is a strong offense. And this is the first time that President Biden is giving Ukraine that ability to be on the offense while they're in the Kursk region and they deploy these missiles elsewhere. Before there's ever a negotiation, I think you do see an acceleration of a land grab. The more I can grab is the more I get to claim at the negotiation table. And I think you see that going on, or have been seeing that go on for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think what now you're seeing is just bombardment, trying to break the will and the spirit of the Ukrainians, so that when they do come to the negotiation table, they'll be a little bit more apt to concede certain things that maybe they normally would not concede. And it goes to Gene's point about manpower in Ukrainian ranks. They're having a hard time mustering younger troops and more troops. So this has to be wearing down on the existing troops, and certainly that has an effect ultimately at the negotiation bargaining table.
Well, the last stroke was when Putin sent a multiple entry ballistic missile into Ukraine, which was outfitted for nuclear, at least nuclear tactical weapons and maybe nuclear bombs also. That has a range of 3,000 kilometers, 3,000 miles. It was outfitted with conventional explosives, but it was a statement of his latest weapons and a threat, sabre rattling of major magnitude, because
Right.
it could easily be outfitted with nuclear weapons. And he wanted to get into position to be more powerful when it came time to sit at the table. Your thoughts about all of that?
Well, I think that's a good old-fashioned Cold War flexing of the muscle strategy. See what new toys we have? You don't have this. It tries to unbalance, the weapons that come to bear in a conflict like this. And again, that puts someone at a psychological disadvantage if your weapons are bigger than ours or your weapons are more sophisticated than ours. It puts a little fear in there, into them, and that's what the Cold War was all about. Who can inspire fear and claim greater capabilities of the number of warheads, nuclear warheads, one side has versus the other. And we did that since the 1950s, and until they stopped with SALT treaties and things of that nature. So a lot of it's psychological, I think.
Manfred, Putin wrote himself a memorandum. I like when people do that. He wrote himself a memorandum changing the threshold standards for the use of nuclear weapons, and he lowered the standards. And my recollection is that he lowered the standards so that if a country helps Ukraine by providing, for example, weapons that that country uses to attack Russia, then not only is there a possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons, but there is the possibility that Russia would use those nuclear weapons against the country that was helping Ukraine. So this is a threat on all of Europe, and it's a threat on the United States, and it's a threat of nuclear war. How serious is that? Should we take that seriously, the memo he wrote to himself?
I don't think so. And this bragging that he is famous for, it backfires, because if he charges the Ukraine for getting other powers, Western powers, involved in the war, well, with him hiring 12,000 North Korean soldiers, he has given the Ukraine and the US and France and Britain and Germany a good reason, to tell him, look, we do what we want to do, and you have already broken your own rule. And look, in your presentation, all three of you always comes America first. I'm aware of that, but you should not underestimate the behavior of the Brits. They did the same thing Biden did. And Macron has always been for giving the Ukrainian the possibility to attack Russia within its own territory. So we are not speaking here about in America only behavior. And there's one other thing that I think we have to be aware of when we are talking about the situation today. The Russian situation is not only troublesome in terms of the morale within its own society, with the 600,000 casualties, 300,000 dead, and 300,000 wounded or more. You have, the most recent messages that you hear about the economic situation is the ruble has been in the cellar, has fallen into the cellar. 1 ruble is now worth less than 1 cent. And the inflation in Russia has gone over 20%. So 8.7%. But what you are, I think, confronted with, it's not only that the Ukraine is economically and militarily in a threatening position, but Russia is also. And we never emphasize that. I mean, to have 12,000, I think Jean exaggerated a little bit when she said 100,000. I think it's 12,000.
Well, there's been some discussion of that, Manfred, that more troops from Korea were to follow. And I did see that 100,000 number.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it. But in any case, it doesn't matter. That would make the argument even worse. That the situation for Russia is worse than Putin wants us to believe. But you have, the war has really consolidated Ukrainian national identity. If that was certainly not the intention of Putin. It has made, in that sense, the Ukraine stronger.
Let me offer you this. This is a war, among other things, just as the Middle East war is a war of beyond kinetic attack. This is a war of propaganda, and we know that Putin is very good at doing hybrid war. I mean, he's doing hybrid war against the Baltics, the Balkans. He's doing hybrid against every neighbor, every former Soviet, satellite country. He's trying to intimidate people in this way and that way with social media and with trying to put puppets in place in various countries to soften their position to not support Ukraine. So now what we have in the way of his shifting the blame, if you will, shifting the propaganda, he is trying to frame himself, poor fellow, as a victim of United States aggression, of Biden's decision to allow the Ukrainians to use those attack missiles against Russia inside of Russia. And you can see it in his public statements. You can see it in the press reporting on him, that now he wants to be a victim. So let me ask you, Gene, does that have legs?
No.
People going to buy that? Are they going to agree that the poor fellow is a victim now and poor Russia is being attacked and the United States is the one responsible for all of this?
I see a lot of Putin's moves lately as an expression of weakness.
Right.
We don't have the data, though, so we can't say with security how weak he is. But we know that there are opposition voices in Russia that are muted right now. But we also know that the Russian people have had so many catastrophes in their history. And the latest one was the Prigozhin attempted coup against the Kremlin. And the Russians stood aside to wait and see who had the upper hand. But they will go with whoever has the upper hand. And Putin knows this. Their loyalty is fingernail deep. And it's cynical for good reason. His shooting a hypersonic missile loaded with conventional weapons against a Ukrainian city, it's a terrible weapon, was simply an expression again of weakness. his hybrid attacks on Europe, which have been going on all summer, against facilities, arsons that are committed through locally hired thugs, and now against the DHL cargo planes in Germany and in Lithuania and Poland. In fact, the recent plane crash in Vilnius of a DHL plane may be due to a Russian bomb. We just don't know yet. His assassinations of ordinary people, not just well-known dissidents who live abroad, who escaped Russia. His internet attacks, technical attacks on the satellites, on Europe, the United States, all are expressions of look out, if I'm losing, I'm going to attack. And that's what his written nuclear policy, his new nuclear policy says, and what also Navalny says in his book. I mean, if Putin is backed against a wall, he's like a caged lion. He's going to attack. But that.
Well, does that mean attack the United States as well? I mean, in the memo, he said, we're going to attack, and we're going to take steps against all the countries that are helping Ukraine attack Russia. And that includes the United States. Should we expect something here?
No.
Well, it will be harder, much harder. I wouldn't expect anything. But all I'm saying is that what gives me pause is we have, in a couple of months, we have two strong men facing off against one another, neither of whom wants to lose, both of whom are volatile. They are partially sane and partially mad.
Back to you, Manfred, on one thing is that what is Trump doing here? It's a question that is unanswerable on so many levels. We don't know whether he will do what he says he's going to do, or the extent to which he's going to do it. But what exactly is shaping up as his policy toward Ukraine? Doesn't seem clear that he's going to force a settlement with Putin. It doesn't seem clear that it does seem clear that he's not going to support Zelensky. And Zelensky goes to bend a knee with Trump, and he says, I would like to convince you that it is in the best interest of the United States that you help defend us. And that was in the news, but I never heard anything more about how that meeting went and whether he was successful in any degree at all to convince Trump to support Ukraine. Manfred, can you talk about that? What is Trump's position, and does Zelensky have a chance of changing it?
I have not the slightest idea what his position is. And whether Zelensky can change Trump's mind is a question that I cannot answer either. I think nobody can answer that question, because nobody knows whether he has a mind, a political mind, that is affected by rational arguments. But you see, in addition to this uncertainty, the next 2 months or 6 weeks, I think will give us an assurance that nothing terrible will happen from Russia vis-a-vis the United States. Now, whether anything will happen in other parts of Europe, I don't know. I mean, you have to remember the position of the two largest countries in Europe, Germany and France, are somewhat fragile at this point, because in Germany, you have no government. Well, you have a government, but it is not really functioning, and you will have elections in February, and Scholz will be out. And so you get the conservatives in Germany, Merkel's party, being back in power with whoever the coalition partner will be. It's not clear at this point. So there's uncertainty, but I think if the conservatives, the Christian Democrats, will take over, or when they take over, not if, they will take over, they will strongly support the Ukraine. And maybe they will also give the permission to use German long-range missiles that you have in Germany, this somewhat sentimental attitude among the Social Democrats, Scholz party, toward Russia in general because of Willy Brandt's Eastern policies, which was never accepted in Eastern Europe. You know, they didn't like it. They thought Brandt was too close to the Soviet leaders. And then you have, their sentimental gratitude for the unification. So you have the left being not completely paralyzed by this sentimentality, but undermined. Now, what that will do in the elections in February, I do not think it will change the German support for NATO and Ukraine.
What I'm saying is there are many factors in play. Some of them are battlefield factors, some of them are weapons factors, some of them are propaganda factors, some of these political factors, as you describe in Germany and France too, and maybe the Netherlands as well. And so, there's all kinds of factors, and they all play into what is the situation at a given moment for the settlement table. And that's going to happen before February. So everybody is improving his position. It's watching a chess game. Everybody is taking his pieces and trying to get leverage on the other guy. And there's a lot of pieces on the board. So, Tim, this is something you referred to earlier. What's on the board now? What are the factors in play? What does the platform, the chessboard look like for a settlement? Do you agree with me that everything that is happening is trying to get better position for the players when we finally have a table to discuss settlement?
Well, absolutely. Like I said earlier, everyone's trying to improve their real estate holdings, number one, and two, strike some psychological damage to either party, so that comes to play on the negotiation table. A lot of this also is the wild card, and that is, what's Donald Trump thinking? I'll remind everyone that Bob Woodward mentioned in his book War that Donald Trump had 7 separate conversations with Putin since 2023. Presumably, that wasn't to talk about buying Trump steaks or his basketball shoes. Something was said there, and as Americans, I don't think we know what that is. I'm not sure the State Department knows what that is. I'm not sure if the CIA knows what those conversations entailed. So who knows what was spoken as far as assurances? What we can say is Donald Trump did call Putin and said, I would like you not to advance any further into Ukraine. He said, I don't want you to expand this war. And presumably Trump is speaking to his hypersonic missiles and the rush for more real estate. And so I think that's the wild card, is Donald Trump. And until we know what's in Donald Trump's mind, only I can fix it attitude, everyone's left guessing.
Well, we have, as Manfred mentioned, we have 6 or 7 weeks left till Trump takes power, although there was an article in the paper recently to suggest that he's dominating the media and he's actually having an effect on international affairs now. What is your sense of the timeline here? These factors are in play. It's obvious that the two sides and other interested countries and parties are trying to affect those factors. When exactly will the platform be ready? When will there be a settlement? Will it be before or after the inauguration? Will it be in a week or two or in several months, maybe after Olaf Scholz is replaced in Germany? Who knows what? What does the timeline look like to you to connect the dots?
Well, that's like me trying to predict the groundhog, whether or not he sees his shadow in February or not. I think, again, I think both countries, both leaders are looking for an off-ramp. As both Manfred and Gina stated, Putin is really in a weakened state right now. I mean, his troops, he has to basically purchase mercenaries from North Korea. That's not a good sign. He has to let out the prisoners from his jails. Not a good sign. We know, or we think we know, that maybe there's up to 200,000 dead Russian soldiers. That's
More.
or more. That's a catastrophic number. Remember, in all the years of Vietnam, the United States lost 58,000 or plus 58,000 soldiers. 200,000 in 2.5, 3 years is really a shock to the Russian population, in particular to families and mothers. So I think Putin is looking for an off-ramp. Certainly Zelensky is. He's barely hanging in there with his troop recruitments and the fact that there's this massive destruction going on in his infrastructure, his energy infrastructure, and they're just basically trying to hold on to until a settlement does come. So I would look for one earlier. Again, I can't predict, but I would look for some sort of meeting of the minds at a table somewhere prior to February, not waiting for Donald Trump to be sworn in as president.
Let me offer you this thought. You know, the escalation that's going on now is pretty shrill. The statements that Putin is making, his memo to himself, the use of that hypersonic missile the other day, this is moving at a rapid rate, at a threatening rate. And my question is sort of rhetorical. How long can the parties maintain this escalation? The escalation is trying to set the stage on both sides for a settlement. But if, we're at this level, this very shrill level of rhetoric and weaponry, they can't go too much further without having to do more. And if they do more, that doesn't work in favor of a settlement. So it seems to me, I'm just offering you this thought for your consideration, that because we are where we are, because it has escalated all in the last two weeks, it's going to be soon, because they can't keep going like this. What do you think? Let me ask Jean about that and see what she thinks.
Well, I think they are both escalating because I think they expect Trump is going to impose a negotiation on both of them. And each wants to be in the best position for escalation. But the winter is coming too. And typically in this war, during the winter, you can't really have a strategic advance. Putin is utilizing other weapons, symbolically the hypersonic missile and the attacks in Europe. He's trying to degrade European and support so that they can't step in, as Manfred has often said they would, should Trump step back. The only pattern we have for a negotiated settlement on Trump's watch is the Afghanistan settlement with the Taliban. That did not go well. He gave away the store to the Taliban. He set a date that was too soon. Biden got blamed for it in the execution of it. We lost 13 troops, but that, quite frankly, in the annals of war amounts to very little. But it was made very much of by GOP propaganda and MAGA propaganda. But it was, in fact, it was Trump who did not negotiate effectively. And we can look forward to the fact that he's going to put excess pressure on Ukraine only if Europe can hold, and as Manfred has said, both France and Germany, two linchpins of the European NATO alliance, will be facing a right-wing turn in their governments and a change of government. So Putin is a shrewd guy. He's very cunning. And he could pull this thing out just by being more cunning than anybody else. But if we don't lose nerve, and if the people that Trump puts in to do the negotiation for him stand strong, then I think we can bring the war to an end without giving away Ukraine.
Manfred, let me go to you and tell you some of my conclusions about all of this. I think that whatever happens in the play of these factors and the chessboard and the ultimate meeting, hopefully soon, I think Ukraine is really over. because the terms that have been bandied about really don't protect Ukraine. Russia wants Ukraine to promise never to join NATO. Never is a long time, by the way. And Ukraine wants to be sure that it has security. And Russia will never give it security because Russia has designs on it over the long term. So, this is going to result in a tremendous loss for Ukraine. It was an innocent party. It was attacked, brutally attacked. Its people were kidnapped and raped. Its cities were destroyed. Its economy was destroyed. Its agriculture was destroyed. Ukraine is like over. It'll never be the same. Not sure that people will step in and fix it either, including Trump. And if Ukraine is over, the liberal world order is over. It means you can never be sure that your neighbor will not attack you. You can never be sure that Russia will not invade you on a given Tuesday. And it offers the possibilities. Yes, the big countries can invade the little ones. It offers the lesson that sanctions don't really work. It offers the lesson that one country, even far away, can supply money, weapons, and troops to another. It is really a fragmentation of the world order. Manfred, your thoughts about that? Are you more optimistic than I am?
Well, yes, certainly much more optimistic about Ukraine. I think that's the opposite of what you said. I think this war has reaffirmed Ukrainian identity in a way that was not available before. So for that reason, what you just said, in a kind of defeatist way about the Ukraine, I think it's just the opposite. Now, we don't know at this point what is going on in the mind of President Biden. Remember, we still have a president in this country for 6 weeks before Trump comes into power. And Biden made this decision giving the Ukrainians the permission to use the missiles reaching into Russian territory, which he should have done long before. Macron was right when he suggested that, and the Brits have followed that advice. But we don't know what Biden may do in the last. Maybe he wants to work some more on his legacy and provoke, Putin. I have not the slightest idea.
Let me ask the same question to Tim. Are you optimistic about these things, about the future of Ukraine and therefore the future of the world order? That the future of one country supplying money, weapons, and troops to another with impunity, that one country can deny sanctions and can get around sanctions and invade its neighbors. How optimistic are you? Of course, it depends on what happens in the settlement, but the settlement is going to cost Ukraine probably 20% of its territory, and it's an innocent party. So my question is, how optimistic are you that we won't see this again?
Like I said, I bet a pizza on this. I don't remember what percentage of Ukraine was dominated by Russia in 2014. I don't know if that was 20% or what exactly. I think we get closer to that number rather than whatever Russia has, they hold. I am a little more optimistic because I just heard that Ukraine and Zelensky himself wants to appeal to Donald Trump's sense of transactionalism, to say that Ukraine now is an opportunity for entrepreneurship, businesses to come in there and rebuild Ukraine. There is a great money-making scheme at hand here, and that should attract Donald Trump, if nothing else. And that would give him an incentive to bring the parties to the table and work out an agreeable settlement for both sides. And then as far as future conflicts, as I said before, I think you'll see a military buildup, not unlike the DMZ between North and South Korea. It'll be so massive with military presence that neither side will think about broaching the other side. But again, I'm predicting here, and I know that's something Gene and Manfred don't like to do, but I enjoy it.
So let me ask you the same question, Gene. This has been a real bump in the road here in terms of the liberal world order, and Ukraine will never be the same. It'll never be safe again, and perhaps NATO will never have the kind of prestige it had before. The liberal world order is going to change, and all these notions about sanctions and supplying money from far away and weapons and troops and proxies, if you will, just like Iran, those things have changed our world. Are these things reversible? Jack Balkin, and I wrote a commentary about this, advised us back in the 2000s that history always moves forward. It doesn't go back. And if you wish to have what you had before, forget about it. Everything that happens is on the record. Everything that happens affects the future. And it's all kind of a blend of every factor. So your thoughts, Jane?
It depends on how history moves forward. It can move 2 steps backwards and 3 steps forwards. And it depends on what era you're living in, whether you're going backward or forwards. The arc of history may bend toward progress, but it bends in a very convoluted way, if you will. It just seems that way to us also. We are also approaching carrying capacity of Earth and carrying capacity of our climate as well. That's the background elephant in the room. But I look upon any negotiation and settlement in Ukraine as a battle between 2 prize fighters who get into the ring, neither one of whom is willing to lose, each one of which wants to dominate the other. It's inconceivable to me that Trump would allow anyone to dominate him. So his love affair with Putin may turn into unrequited love or disappointment, and we could have a divorce. And then I would say that wouldn't be good for either of us, because both men would be in an unstable situation and would be more likely to tend to their gut instincts than their reason. However, I do think that Ukraine will be smaller after the negotiation, but will exist. There will be businesses from all over the world coming in there. They're doing that now to rebuild Ukraine and make it prosperous. But the border with Russia will be intensified militarily and will have to be defended, because as long as Putin's in power, it will always be threatened. He will then turn to some other country, Moldova or Lithuania or whatever, to make inroads. He's very angry at Poland. He has to maintain his facade of being hyper masculine in order to stay in power. He is, like Trump, someone who cannot be seen to lose. So in one way or another, he will have to tweak reality to appear to come out on top. And it may take another aggression in some other direction if he feels that he is somehow undercut by any settlement. It will also make him a very tough and canny negotiator. And as I think of the two, he is the smarter negotiator and Trump is the weaker. But I think in terms of just sheer confrontation of 2 strongmen, Trump is not going to allow anyone, even Putin, to make him look like a loser.
Okay, let's do your thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewing audience. Manfred, you start, and you might include the answer to this question. Are we going to have further escalation here,
No.
or have we had enough?
No, I don't think we will have further escalation. And whatever Gene predicted as a possibility or suggested as a possibility that Putin will move on Lithuania or Poland, I think that will be his grave. That will be the end of Putin's regime, because further he doesn't have the troops, and NATO will simply respond. Whatever you think about NATO, with Trump's America in place, I think if Putin is so stupid to move into Lithuania or Poland, that's his end. So for that reason, but I mean, I do not underestimate his grandiose self-interpretation. And if you have seen last night's Frontline documentary about Xi Jinping, there's a similarity between the two. And Xi Jinping, is in trouble economically at this point, and for all kinds of other reasons. So you have here two grandiose political figures who want to restore, in Putin's case, imperial Russia, in Xi Jinping's case, China that includes not only Taiwan, but in Hong Kong, but all kinds of other places. So look, when it comes to the Ukraine, I'm sorry to say, the Ukraine will become reconstructed, restored by a European Marshall Plan.
Tim, we've had a couple of references to the restoration of Ukraine, and surely it's going to need billions, if not trillions, to restore all those damaged institutions, buildings, power plants, what have you, the dams. I mean, it's going to be a big deal. And somebody's going to have to kick in the money. Well, who is that going to be? We have Gaza too, and we have Lebanon, and somebody's going to have to kick in the money to restore those places. Where's that all going to come from? And on top of that, that the COP29 conference just a few days ago was a failure. They couldn't agree, and they're not kicking in the money. And as Gene said, that's a pretty serious problem, because climate change is the most existential threat to humanity that we know of. And all of this is secondary. All of it is secondary to climate change. So where's the money going to come for climate change, which is not there, for Gaza and Lebanon? Where's that going to come from? And where's Ukraine going to come from? Is there enough money around to do that? And how much of that is Trump going to encourage?
So you mentioned the magic word there, Trump. As you know, Trump is isolationist at heart, America first. He is not going to entertain protests from his loyal base and voters that we're now conducting a Marshall Plan in Ukraine. He will be
a European, not an American.
Yeah, I agree. I was getting to that. So that he'll retract. He'll make a token gesture, and he will not be a major player, but the EU will, and you're going to see billions of dollars.
Euros is enough.
Being set forth for Ukraine for its rebuild. As I said, though, regardless of who's rebuilding it, if you want to stop the conflict, give all parties, Trump, Zelensky, Putin, give them an off-ramp off the freeway that allows them to, one, save face, and two, gives them an opportunity to twist their words into propaganda, saying that we achieved a victory for Mother Russia, or we achieved victory for Ukraine ultimately, or Trump, see, I am the deal breaker, I'm the deal maker. I alone can fix this. So each ego is looking for an off-ramp and a chance to claim a victory that really isn't a victory.
Let me offer that all this discussion suggests to me that we have, bullies in the schoolyard fighting with each other, and there's no teacher there. There's no monitor there. There's nobody telling them to stop. There's no in loco parentis doesn't exist. And it's sort of a fragmented world involving groups that are only after their own self-interest and are not, there are no guardrails. And so you look at NATO. NATO is a defense organization, but it can't force these parties to stop fighting. And then the EU is even further away from that, and the United Nations is non-functional, dysfunctional. And in a world where we have so many issues and so many possibilities of autocracies violating the sovereignty of their neighbors, we really do need a global organization that can be in loco parentis and can be powerful and say, stop it, you boys. And I wonder your thoughts about whether the United Nations can be resurrected, revitalized to be that organization, or whether we need another organization, yes or no? And if we need another organization, which I believe we do, how do we address that? How do we make that happen? Your thoughts?
Yes. No, it's not the United Nations. I think the only organization that is a bulwark against international violence and chaos is NATO. It has recently expanded, and it is really frightening that the MAGA group is anti-NATO. If we become isolationist, we will no longer be protected by two oceans. Nations now have the technology to attack and defeat other nations despite such grand geographical obstacles. Trump does not understand this. Putin is a man dedicated to the expansion of what he calls Russian civilization and the defeat of the Pax Americana. Remember, we've had 80 years of relative peace, no world wars, because of the United States and Europe and NATO and the United Nations too, but that is a superstructure based on the military integration of the free world to stand as a bulwark against the inroads of aggressor nations. And so Trump, in dismantling that bulwark and trying to retreat into a fortress United States, will only create greater violence and chaos in the world and dismantle the institutions we have so carefully put in place to reorder the world. We may be heading for very rough seas, and I don't know how much damage can be done in 4 years or whether internally resistors and knowledgeable people in the United States will be able to limit the damage that Trump can do in trying to dismantle the order, the world order that we have set in place against a determined and implacable enemy who's trying to create a grand alliance outside of the West and the United States and their alliance in order to attack and undermine both internally and by external means the only world order that has kept us safe for my entire lifetime.
Well, thank you, Gene. That's a great way to close. We're out of time. I want to thank Tim Apicella, co-host, Gene Rosenfeld, Manfred Henningsen, our esteemed guests. Thank you so much for this discussion. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Thanks to our viewers for watching. Aloha.